Good evening and welcome. Tonight I will be reading to you some articles out of History magazine. There's a section at the end of each magazine called Discoveries, which is about ancient sites and archaeology, but more of the stories of how the sites were excavated, things like that. It's really, really fascinating. It's the part of the magazine I always look forward to the most when I get a new issue. So tonight we have Treasures of the Library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, in today's Iraq. We have Apollo of Cyrene, emblem of an ancient city, and there's Cyrene in today's Libya. And the origins of African art, Nok terracottas. And there's Nok in today's Nigeria. These articles, though, were requested by my channel members, and quite a few picked these. These articles were chosen by Alex, Amina, Marta, Veer, Pil, Alessia, Alyssa, Matthew, all the happy squirrels, and Craig. Thank you all for choosing these articles. And if you watching this would like to pick which history magazine articles that I read in the future, you can click the join button that's just down there, right by the subscribe button, to become a channel member. My channel members are only 99 US cents per month, the cheapest I can possibly set it to. If I could go lower, I definitely could, because I know that rates are different around the world, and I want everyone to have an affordable chance to become a channel member, because you don't only get to pick history magazine articles, you get to watch all of my videos early, you get your name in every video, you get exclusive emojis whenever I go live, and you get exclusive videos where my channel members pick the topics, and I record whatever topics they choose. And there's been some really good ones lately. I've been having a lot of fun making the members only videos. So if you'd like to be a part of that, I would love to have you. But let's get into it. We're going to go in chronological order and start in Nineveh, the treasures of the library of Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal, the most powerful king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire in the mid-7th century BCE, was known for his ruthless military prowess, his incredible lion hunting skills, and for being a librarian. Palace of Ashurbanipal, King of the Universe, King of Assyria, reads an inscription denoting his ownership on one of over 30,000 clay tablets and fragments from the magnificent library he maintained at his capital Nineveh, today in northern Iraq. The 19th century discovery of the library by British archaeologists was a game changer for Assyrian studies. Previously, documented sources on Ashurbanipal consisted of one reference in the Bible and often fanciful accounts of his life in later classical texts. With the discovery of the tablets, on which scribes had used reeds to impress cuneiform or wedge-shaped letters, the beliefs, liturgy, medicine, politics, and diplomacy of the Assyrian world came into sharp focus. Among the many tablets brought to London was a fragment of the earliest long-form literary work ever found, the Epic of Gilgamesh, containing stories such as that of the Great Flood, also found in the Bible. The epic electrified 19th century scholarship. Seeking Nineveh. 19th century British scholars had a fascination with the region of Mesopotamia, inspired by their interest in cities named in the Bible. Among these is Nineveh, which the Book of Jonah depicts as a wicked place. Since the abandonment of the site of Nineveh in the early Islamic period, European scholars knew more or less where it was situated, and references to it appear in the written record. In 1820, British diplomat and antiquarian Claudius James Rich carried out the first formal survey of Nineveh, then under Ottoman rule, where he discovered a relief with some tablets with cuneiform writing. Relief and some tablets. The first large-scale excavations were conducted by British archaeologist Austin Henry Layard between 1847 and 1851. Layard had gained a love for Mesopotamian history during a trip through Anatolia and Syria in the early 1840s. His work at Nineveh unearthed the remains of magnificent palaces adorned with bas-reliefs depicting hunting, war, and banquets. They were built by the two greatest Neo-Assyrian kings, Sennacherib and his grandson Ashurbanipal. Ancient libraries. In the spring of 1850, Layard's team found a vast number of tablets with cuneiform writing in rooms 40 and 41 of Sennacherib's southwest palace in Nineveh. 3 years later, Iraqi archaeologist Hormuz Rassam, Layard's successor, found a similar storeroom of tablets in the North Palace built by Ashurbanipal. A picture began to form of Nineveh as an emerging cultural powerhouse under Ashurbanipal. In the mid-7th century BCE, the king sought to make his capital a center of learning to rival Babylon to the south. During his campaigns against Babylon, which had become restive under Assyrian control, Ashurbanipal's forces plundered vast numbers of scholarly tablets that were then brought to Nineveh. Babylonian scribes were also taken captive and forced to work in the royal libraries. These tactics significantly enriched Nineveh's collections, filling Ashurbanipal's archive with centuries of Mesopotamian knowledge and cementing its status as the intellectual heart of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians had a word for what we call libraries, and it's this word, Gurginaku. I have no idea. Ancient Assyrian, I'm not an expert. Used sporadically from the 7th to the 2nd century BCE, the Akkadian word refers to a room, usually in a temple, where scholarly tablets were kept. It also refers to the contents of the collection, which were mainly literary, scholarly, lexical, mathematical, medical, and divinatory. The main users of the Gurginaku were the Umnu, or wise men, scribes who specialized in magic and divination, such as celestial observation, divination using animal entrails, or haruspicy, healing through exorcism, or herbalism. I've never heard this word, healing through exorcism. I thought it said hairspray at first, which is why I hesitated. And then I realized it was a word I didn't know. That's funny. Experts in hairspray. I mean, look at these curls. Maybe they were. There may have been as many as 4 libraries in Nineveh, 1 in each palace, and 2 more in the nearby temples of Nabu, the god of wisdom, and Ishtar, the great goddess of love and war. In addition to the libraries, the citadel housed a separate archive for legal and administrative records. These were also severely damaged after Assyria's fall, but some were recovered and housed in the British Museum. In 2016, the Temple of Nabu and remaining on-site artifacts were destroyed by ISIS. Many of the tablets found at Nineveh contain colophons, or information at the end of text, stating that they were written or collected in the name of Ashurbanipal. based on Layard's findings. In 1901, Cambridge scholar John Willis Clark proposed a layout of Ashurbanipal's collection, suggesting it had aspects of what would be recognizable as a library, noting the tablets have been sorted under the following heads: history, law, science, magic, dogma, legends. Layard's research strongly suggests a functionary was in charge of the collection and that it had some form of cataloging system. Ashurbanipal emphasized his wisdom. The following is from the school days inscription about his education. It reads almost like a modern-day resume. Marduk, the sage of the gods, granted me a broad mind and extensive knowledge as a gift. The god Nabu, the scribe of everything, bestowed on me the precepts of his wisdom as a present. The gods Ninurta and Nergal endowed my body with power, virility, and unrivaled strength. I learned the craft of the sage Adapa, the secret hidden lore, all of the scribal arts. I am able to recognize celestial and terrestrial omens and can discuss them in an assembly of scholars. I have read cunningly written texts in obscure Sumerian and Akkadian that are difficult to interpret. It does sound like a resume, doesn't it? When Nineveh began to weaken by the late 7th century BCE, Babylon joined forces with neighboring Media to challenge Assyrian rule. In 612 BCE, the coalition set Nineveh on fire, ending the Assyrian Empire. Epic consequences. Over 30,000 tablets and fragments recovered by Layard, Rassam, and later excavators are now preserved in London's British Museum. Written by Babylonian scribes, they offer invaluable insights into the literary, scientific, and administrative knowledge of the ancient Near East, and stand as a testament to cultural exchange, not only between Assyria and Babylon, but also among neighboring peoples, including the Hebrews. In the 1860s, self-taught Assyriologist George Smith took a job at the British Museum, sorting through the large number of Nineveh tablets housed there. One day in 1872, the 32-year-old scholar, surrounded by fragments about itemizing cattle and wine jars, found himself reading a story about a flood and a bird sent out to search for dry land. The similarities with the story of Noah's flood in the Bible were so startling that Smith is said to have danced around the room with excitement. I think George Smith and I have some things in common. What Smith had discovered was a fragment of the world's oldest epic poem, centering on the world's first literary hero, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Spurred to perform marvelous feats, the semi-divine king Gilgamesh learns to accept his morality. The stories of Gilgamesh developed from Sumerian poems in the late 3rd millennium BCE and were later woven into a long epic by the Babylonians, whose rich literary culture Ashurbanipal coveted and plundered. The 12-tablet version that came into the library, and which even then must have been venerated as an ancient text, is the most complete version of Gilgamesh yet found. The striking similarity of the flood story with that of Noah's Ark in the Bible caused a sensation in Victorian England. To some, it affirmed the historical truth of the Bible. To others, it supported the view that the Bible was a cultural reflection of much older Mesopotamian stories. To historians, it demonstrated the rich flow of influences across the region. See the last page here. The last page of the magazine is always an advertisement, so I folded them all back. It says Signs, Omens, and Demons. Cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped script, was made by pressing the tip of a reed into wet clay tablets that later hardened. Nineveh's vast repository of tablets were buried under rubble after the Assyrian capital was put to the torch in 612 BCE. Fire, normally the enemy of archaeology, may have helped preserve the brittle tablets by baking them, thereby making them even harder without damaging the inscriptions. Shattered but still relatively legible, the tablets lay entombed for more than 2,500 years. They are now housed in the British Museum, and the painstaking work to reassemble them continues. It says this is a fragment of a tablet containing astrological omens and forecasts for the month of Andaru, which is about February to March. What is that? It looks like a lot of the same words over and over again. It says this tablet, reconstructed from several fragments, contains incantations to protect against attacks by demons and ghosts. Very important to have. And these here are a list of cuneiform signs found in the Temple of Nabu. The scribe drew the objects from which the signs were believed to be derived. Well, it's pretty great. Now this picture, I can't tell in the viewfinder if it's glossy or not, but this paper is very, very smooth and glossy. And no matter what light I put on, it reflects off this paper really bright. So I'm sorry if you can't really see this image, because dark images are the worst. But it is many fragments of tablets housed in the British Library, British Museum? Yeah. London's British Museum houses over 30,000 tablet fragments from the site of Nineveh in northern Iraq. That's pretty cool to see. This says the stamp of individuality. Recent analysis of the corpus of Nineveh tablets by a German-British team is producing interesting insights. For example, it was initially thought that reconstructing the tablets would be just a matter of time and effort. Now, even with all the pieces digitally catalogued, it has only been possible to reconstruct about 200 tablets, and even these are missing large sections. It has also been established that many tablets were marked with colophons, or notes placed at the end of text, of different types. These identified the kind of text they contained, or the period in which they were made. Some were even signed by individual scribes. The conclusion is that the rest of the fragments have been lost, or have yet to be found in Nineveh. And there's a depiction here of what the library probably looked like. Really amazing. I always wondered, this is so random, but you see these Mesopotamian men with their very straight, long beards. Like, I want to know, and maybe someone out there knows this, how did they maintain their facial hair so well? I mean, maybe they didn't. Maybe it's because we've only seen images like this. As you can see Ashurbanipal here with his long beard. You know, maybe only the nobility was well-groomed, and we just assume that everyone was well-groomed, but I don't know. There's a loud car outside. They go. Rooms filled with shattered tablets. In his book, Discoveries in the Ruins of Nineveh and Babylon, written for the general public, Austin Henry Layard detailed what the first tablet storeroom in Nineveh was like. There's a long quote from him here. The chambers I am describing appear to have been a depository in the palace of Nineveh for such documents. To the height of a foot or more from the floor, they were entirely filled with them, some entire, but the greater part broken into many fragments, probably by the falling in of the upper part of the building. They were of different sizes. The largest tablets were flat, the smaller were more slightly convex. The cuneiform characters on most of them were singularly sharp and well defined, but so minute in some instances as to be almost illegible without a magnifying glass. What if they had magnifying glasses to make those marks so small? And you can see a sketch of him here, looking at this ruined room here with all the art on the walls. Pretty cool. I love reading about ancient Mesopotamia. It's so great. I always feel like I learn something every time I read a new article about Mesopotamia. But we're going to head over to Africa for the rest of this video. And head over to Libya and read about the Apollo statue in Cyrene. In the spring of 1860, Robert Murdoch Smith, an engineer and young lieutenant in the British Army serving in Malta, hatched a plan for an archaeological exploration in North Africa. You can see Malta up there, and then there's North Africa. Anyway, he convinced a colleague from the Royal Navy, amateur artist Edwin Augustus Porcher, to join him on the adventure. Both men had already witnessed fabulous archaeological discoveries made by colleagues that had caused a major stir back home in Great Britain. Now they wished to mount their own excavation and hoped to discover some splendid treasures from antiquity for themselves. Smith and Porcher chose as their destination the coast of Libya, a territory home to relatively unexplored ancient sites. In the 7th century BCE, Greek colonists founded the city of Cyrene there, which became one of the most important urban centers in the region. But after major earthquakes in the years 262 and 365 CE, the city was left in ruins, visited only by nomads and a few local inhabitants. The remains of its monumental necropolises and ancient temples stood undocumented by historians until the early 19th century, when various European travelers visited Cyrene. Some recorded their impressions in evocative chronicles and engravings. Among them were brothers Frederick and Henry Beechey and James Hamilton. Colonel Herman, British consul in Libya, visited Cyrene in 1849 and wrote a detailed description of the city. It was these tantalizing accounts that had piqued Smith and Porcher's curiosity. The expedition begins. After obtaining the necessary permits from the Turkish authorities, since then Libya was part of the Ottoman Empire, Smith and Porcher left Malta and arrived in Cyrene on December 23, 1860. As they made their way through the necropolis on the edge of the city, they found that many of the tombs had been looted. They decided to use these burial chambers as places to camp and focused their attention on the ruins of the city. They found columns, the remnants of imposing walls, and a theater, fountains, and podiums. Cyrene, half swallowed up by the surrounding landscape, still showed the vestiges of a glorious past. After surveys were made across the site, excavation work began in an area now known as the Sanctuary of Apollo. There, Smith and Porcher located a monumental fountain and the remains of a once vast building. 2 inscriptions dedicated to Apollo found nearby led them to identify this building as a temple of the god. The ruins were surrounded by farmland that the local population wanted to maintain, and this initially prevented a complete excavation of the site. So the work was carried out in stages. When earth was removed from one area, it was replaced in another that had already been excavated. As they dug, Smith and Porcher found walls and floors superimposed on each other, which indicated that the site had been reused throughout antiquity. In the oldest layer, they located part of the original paving columns, and remains of materials that had served as the temple's roof. As Smith and Porcher excavated within the confines of the ruined temple, there in the cella, the inner part of the temple where the image of a deity would have been placed, they began to uncover the kind of artifacts they'd been hoping for. The first find was a female figure about 3 feet 6 inches high and wearing fine drapery. I'm guessing it's this. Later, in no particular order, they found a statue they identified as the Emperor Hadrian, as well as a head of the goddess Minerva and another of Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Marcellinus, the first Roman praetor of Cyrene. There were also representations of Jupiter, Ammon, the nymph Cyrene with a lion, and a huntress, perhaps the goddess Diana, among others. The pieces must have adorned the temple in ancient times and lain buried since the earthquake, whose estimated magnitude was 8.0 to 8.5 that had devastated Cyrene in 365. Asclepius or Apollo. One find in the cella particularly excited Smith and Porcher. Lying on the ground near a large pedestal on which it had once been displayed was a colossal marble statue. It's this one over here, by the way. We'll talk about it later. The head had broken off, and the body was cleanly fragmented into 3 large pieces and more than 100 pieces of smaller ones. It seemed to depict an ancient deity with hints of draped garments, a cithara or lyre, a snake, and the trunk of a tree. Initially, Smith and Porcher assumed that the statue lying in what they believed to be the Temple of Apollo must be a statue of Apollo himself. But then, in March 1861, Smith wrote a letter explaining that he had reconsidered this attribution and now believed the figure to depict the god of medicine, Asclepius or Asclepius. There is no inscription, but the statue is shown to be one of Asclepius by the presence of a serpent wound around the trunk of a tree and entwining a rod. This new theory led him to change his mind about the temple too. This, instead of being, as I supposed, the temple of Apollo, is no doubt the temple of Asclepius. A conflict with the workers over their pay forced the remains of the statue to be reburied temporarily until new workers arrived. Then, with the help of a camel and 3 other men, the pieces of the broken statue were transferred to the same tomb in the necropolis where Smith and Porcher had set up camp. The explorers had been using the tombs as a kind of warehouse, storing fragments of the sculpture there for safety. The excavation was completed on April 20th, when the local workers left to tend to the harvest in their fields. The time had come to pack up the finds for transportation to England. Their sheer number forced Smith and Porcher to make a selection. Some statues had to remain in situ due to their weight. One such piece was that of the Emperor Hadrian. Among the objects shipped to London were the pieces of the colossal statue found in the cella of the temple. There, after a thorough study, scholars would conclude that it was, in fact, a representation of Apollo, as Smith and Porcher had initially supposed. Moving the marbles. The transportation of the artifacts to London was a feat in itself. On May 29th, a procession of camels and 2 wagons carried the precious cargo to the port where the British ship Assurance was waiting. British ship Assurance is a lot to say. Say that 10 times fast. Upon its arrival in London, the broken statue underwent meticulous restoration work at the British Museum and was successfully reassembled from 3 main fragments and 118 smaller ones. Scholars believe the statue was not destroyed by looters, but shattered after falling from its pedestal, probably during the earthquake of 365. Research shows that it was made in the 2nd century CE and was copied from an Hellenistic original dating to between 200 and 150 BCE. The statue depicts Apollo as the god of music, or Apollo Citharodus, supporting a cithara that rests on the trunk of a tree, but the figure is simultaneously Apollo Pythios, poised to slay the monstrous serpent Python. Apollo Pythios, probably Python. The Apollo of Cyrene still rests in the British Museum, where it is visited to this day. It's a picture up here saying Italians in Cyrene. In 1911, Libya became an Italian colony, despite strong opposition from the local population. The Italian authorities promoted archaeological excavations in their newly seized territories, particularly in Cyrene, with its sanctuary of Apollo, agora, temple of Zeus, buildings of the Acropolis and Necropolis. The excavations were carried out to the most advanced scientific criteria of the day and were accompanied by the restoration of various buildings. After Libyan independence in 1951, several British teams continued investigations in Cyrene, as did a new Italian mission that, among other actions, restored the Temple of Zeus. And it shows some soldiers here in Cyrene reading something there on that stone. I bet you they can't actually read it, and he's just pretending to sound smart. It's like it's talking about Zeus and Apollo. But he really has no idea what it says. I wonder. So here's Apollo and the nymph Cyrene, it says. Apollo, god of oracles and harmony, protector of music and medicine, was believed to have participated directly in the founding of Cyrene. It was said that the inhabitants of Thera, now Santorini, one of the Cyclades islands of ancient Greece, were concerned about the difficulties the island was facing and went to ask Apollo for advice at his oracle in Delphi. Apollo responded by ordering them to make a pilgrimage to northern Libya and found a city there. According to myth, the name Cyrene comes from a Thessalian nymph of the same name, daughter of the Lapith king Hypsias, who lived in the forests of Mount Pelion. Her wild and free nature caught the attention of the god Apollo, who fell in love with her. Apollo then kidnapped Cyrene and took her in a golden chariot to Libya. There he granted her dominion over the land that would bear her name, Cyrene. This is probably very glossy. It's a very dark page, so I'm sorry if it's hard to see. So here's the Apollo of Cyrene, number 1, the god. Apollo's face shows great serenity and beauty. His long curly hair, wreathed in laurel, cascades over his shoulders. The god appears half naked, barely covered by a himation or wrap around his thighs. Number 2, musician. Apollo's depicted as the god of music, Apollo Citharodus, holding a cithara or ancient lyre in his left hand. Number 3, avenger. The cithara rests on the trunk of a tree from whose branches hangs a quiver. See it here. An attribute of Apollo in his role as a god who dispenses justice. And it says savior. A great serpent coils around the tree trunk by Apollo's left foot. This is Python, the monster that sought to destroy the earth and terrorize its inhabitants. Apollo killed it, and in memory of his feat, founded the Pythian Games, which were held in Delphi. Maybe it was Apollo Pythias then, because that's the Pythian Games. Maybe the monster's Python. I do not know. No idea. Treasures of Cyrene. In the sanctuary of Apollo and other temples in Cyrene, numerous sculptures have been recovered, such as these shown here. This is showing Isis, it says, statue representing Egyptian goddess Isis, found in her temple in Cyrene. Wow. This is an acroterion or pedestal decorated with the face of Gorgon from the sanctuary of Apollo. There's one of the standing lions that adorned the exedra in front of the sanctuary of Apollo. It's very cute. And the head of a Ptolemaic king discovered in the sanctuary of Apollo. It looks so perfect. It looks like it hasn't been damaged at all. And then here's a great photo of the site today. It says the ruins of Cyrene, including the remains of the sanctuary of Apollo, where according to myth, Apollo had slept with the nymph Cyrene. Here it says plundered tombs. The Greek colonists who founded Cyrene took advantage of the mountain slopes to excavate funeral chambers. They adorned the tombs with monumental facades, incorporating columns, entablatures, and pediments. The grave goods deposited in the chambers were unfortunately lost, looted over time. There's an engraving of what they looked like in 1856. And I assume that these rocks up here is where those tombs were located. Pretty great. Lastly, we have the origins of African art, knock terracottas. I forget who it was, one of my channel members said I'd never heard of knock terracottas, and that's why they picked it. And it's one of the first things that comes to mind when I think of African archaeology, other than the Benin bronzes or Great Zimbabwe. They're so iconic. They're so amazing. Let's read, if you've never heard of the knock terracottas, let's read about them now, how they were found. In 1886, when Nigeria was a colony of the British Empire, the Royal Niger Company gained exclusive mineral rights over the Jos Plateau in central Nigeria, an area rich in tin ore and inhabited by the Birom people. In the foothills, access routes to the mines ran through an area called Nok. Over the years, with the exploitation of the mines and the local people who overwhelmingly provided the labor force, numerous fragments of ancient pottery came to light, but were largely ignored. One piece, too striking to be disregarded, appeared in 1928, a small monkey head sculpted in terracotta. The mine manager, Lieutenant Colonel John Dent Young, had the piece and other fragments transferred to a museum in the city of Jos, the provincial capital. 15 years later, a miner found another terracotta head and took it home, where he used it as a scarecrow, apparently with some success. A British engineer noticed the piece about a year later and brought it to Jos, where he showed it to Bernard Fagg, an archaeologist working in Nigeria as a civil administrator for the British Colonial Service. Fagg immediately recognized the sculpture's significance. It was stylistically similar to the monkey head discovered in 1928, and the features of both objects seemed unlike those of any known artistic tradition. He believed it could be the work of a historical African culture as yet unknown. I'm pretty sure this is the scarecrow head here. It'll say in here. The search. Curious and enterprising, Fagg decided to investigate. He first talked to the miners, who told him they had found many sculptures of this type, but they were considered a bad omen and usually destroyed. Fagg decided to set out across central Nigeria in search of more pieces of the same style. He discovered that for years the inhabitants of the area had been uncovering similar terracotta pieces, not only in the gravel extracted from the mine, but also in a range of locations, from beneath a hockey field to a rocky summit. In the course of just a few years, through a campaign of purchase and persuasion, and as a result of his own excavations, Fagg managed to collect almost 200 terracottas stylistically similar to the scarecrow piece found in 1943, which is now known as the Jama head after the village where it was found. Yeah, that's the Jama head. That's the scarecrow there. Pretty good scarecrow. Dating the finds. The first answer Fagg sought was the historical period to which these remains belonged, and his initial findings were surprising. Analysis of the soil layers where the pieces were found yielded dates of around 500 BCE. If correct, this dating would rock the academic consensus of the time, which still held that no advanced cultures existed in sub-Saharan Africa at such an early date. That is, cultures with knowledge of ceramics, ones capable of creating such refined works of art. Over the course of the following decades, Fagg had the pieces dated using other techniques as they became available. First, organic remains encrusted in the surface of the ceramic were studied using carbon-14 dating, and later the terracotta itself was analyzed using thermoluminescence. The results of both analyses confirmed that the finds were indeed remarkably early, dating from 440 BCE to 200 CE. The Nok culture, as Fagg called it, was clearly identified as one of the oldest in sub-Saharan Africa. Further discoveries. In 1947, an exhibition at the British Museum drew international attention to the sculptures. Meanwhile, Fagg continued his research in Nigeria and founded the National Museum in Jos in 1952, one of the first public museums in Nigeria. The initial finds had been discovered in alluvial deposits. This meant the objects were found far from where they were made, having been carried along watercourses. The alluvial soil is the soil around rivers and such. But in 1961, Fagg gained access to a site that had been preserved intact in Taruga, about 90 miles southwest of Nok. The find was groundbreaking. It included no fewer than 13 iron smelting furnaces, evidence of a sizable settled population. Nok figurines were found close by and even inside these furnaces, leading Fagg to suppose that they played some role in magical rites performed while the iron was being worked. After Fagg returned to England to become curator of Oxford's Pitt Rivers Museum in 1964, 4 years after Nigeria gained its independence, his daughter, Angela Fagg Rackham, and the Nigerian archaeologist Joseph Jemker continued the research into the 1980s. At this time, Bernard Fagg began writing his book, Nok Terracottas, which would demonstrate to specialists and the general public the relevance of the Nok culture and its fascinating terracotta figures. An artistic tradition. The statues were modeled without a potter's wheel. That's so amazing. By coiling strips of clay to create the rough form and then smoothing the surface without a potter's wheel. It's crazy. They have perforations in the eyes, nostrils, and mouth, which served not only an aesthetic purpose, but also a functional one, as they allowed air to circulate and prevented the pieces from cracking. Sorry if you can hear the cat outside crying at the door. I'll let him in once I'm done. I'm almost there. Once molded, they were left to dry in the sun before being fired in a kiln, a technique that is still in use in the region today. Nok sculptures are relatively varied. There are heads as well as partial and full-length figures. It sounds like he got picked up and crumbled. heads are as well as partial and full-length figures. The figures are generally individual, but some do appear in pairs or groups. Some full-body statues, in which the figures often appear kneeling, measure up to 28 inches high, while others are much smaller. Although animal sculptures have been found, most of the pieces represent people, both men and women, usually wearing jewelry, with sophisticated hairstyles and intense expressions. These details and adornments have made it possible to identify them as tribal chiefs, priests, musicians, or prisoners of war. After Fagg's initial theory about the use of the figures in iron smelting rituals, various other hypotheses on their function have been put forward. One is that they served as totems, used to encourage good harvests or offer worship to ancestors, and that they could have been placed in shrines, although no traces of such shrines have been found. Recently, German archaeologist Peter Brunig, who resumed research into Nok culture in the 2000s, has revised Nok chronology and formulated another theory. His team discovered that collections of fragments have been found in close proximity to places that were later interpreted as burial sites. It appears that these terracotta pieces had been deliberately buried, sometimes on a bed of stones associated with charcoal remains. These figures show signs of having been broken before burial. Based on the findings, Brunig proposes that the burial and destruction of the sculptures were part of a complex funerary rites, which for now still remain a mystery. That's pretty exciting. I never knew that they were meant for burials. I just thought they were cool art. And look how beautiful these are. They're so amazing. Without a potter's wheel, it's so crazy. Features of Nok figures. According to the latest studies, the Nok sculptural tradition emerged in the 9th century BCE, making it the oldest in Africa outside of Egypt. Although an early decline began in the 4th century BCE, the art rapidly disappeared at the beginning of the Christian era. In light of the highly sophisticated nature of these pieces, scholars have speculated about the existence of a previous artistic tradition and have attempted to draw parallels with the later Ife terracottas and African wood carving practices. However, the Nok tradition remains historically isolated. Nok sculptures had a smooth outer surface achieved by using slip, a silky mixture of clay and water, which eroded in many cases, leaving behind a rough, grainy texture. Although many of these pieces display harmonic depictions of healthy individuals, some have been interpreted as possible representations of ailments, such as facial paralysis or elephantiasis. Wow, interesting. So, anatomy of Nok statuary. Elongated head that is cylindrical, conical, or oval in shape. You can really see that here. Perforations in the pupils, nostrils, mouth, and ears that also served as air vents for the firing process. You can see it's there, even the little one there in his lips. Triangular eyes with eyebrows that often mirror the shape of the lower eyelid. Triangle eyes. Wow, yeah, look at these. Wow, yeah, they're neat. Mustache and beard in some male statues. Small beards are depicted under their chins. You can see his little mustache there and his little beard. Wow. Naked torso for both men and women. The genitals are covered by a garment. Yeah, this one looks like a woman. Yeah, head and torso of a woman. And there's a male figure with one knee bent, it says. Jewelry. Large necklaces rest on the shoulders. There are bracelets on the forearms and anklets on the ankles. A big necklace there. A big necklace here too. Then elaborate hairstyles for both men and women. Some figures are depicted with hair pulled into a bun. The buns are pierced with holes where feathers may have been placed. Looks like a lot of buns there. Some figures are depicted with braids that fall over their ears. Looks like he has some braids. In other instances, the hair is gathered over the forehead as if with a ribbon. Almost looks like he's wearing a hat or like a skull cap or a bonnet even, maybe. Here's a group. I've never seen a group of knock terracottas. That's pretty neat. All standing together like that. So amazing. I didn't realize how old they were either. Itinerant sculptors. Peter Brunig from Goethe University, Frankfurt, led an important research project on knock culture during the first 2 decades of the 21st century. During this study, he established a novel theory related to how the sculptures were made. Analysis of the various terracotta pieces shows they were crafted in a very uniform manner, probably by a small group of specialized sculptors. As there is no evidence of one centralized production center, it is possible that the artists formed itinerant teams that moved around the settlements of the Knock territory. Brunig believes this would make the stylistic homogeneity even more remarkable. That is pretty cool if that's true. This is Peter Brunig right here, uncovering a bunch of stuff right there. Yeah, if the sculptors traveled making their work, that is pretty amazing. A mysterious burial ritual. This orthographic view of a 3D model corresponds to a terracotta deposit at the Ifana site in northwestern Nigeria, excavated by Peter Brunig's team in 2016. The deposit, 12 fragments of different terracotta figures and 2 ceramic vessels, were found near a burial site that is believed to be the result of a funeral ritual. There's a head right there. And this sculpture is the one I think of when I think of knock terracottas. It says this one's at the Louvre in Paris. Yeah, it's got all the hallmarks. It's got the hair pulled back, the long face, the eyes and eyebrows, necklace, and a cloth over the waist, and a little beard too. Very cool. And bracelets, like arm bracelets. Pretty great. And look, this is a freshly dug up head. Look how it's still all muddy. They haven't cleaned it up yet. So amazing. He's got a big old nose. Wow. Looted art. Bernard Fagg's findings had the unintended effect of generating high demand for knock terracottas among collectors in Europe and the US. This encouraged hundreds of clandestine excavations for pieces to sell on the black market, a practice still ongoing. These digs resulted in not only the looting of valuable objects, but also the destruction of their archaeological context. A counterfeiting industry has also emerged because of the terracottas' high market value, leading to doubts about the authenticity of many pieces found in museums and private collections. Wow. Here it says the Jama head is at the Nigerian National Museum in Lagos. Now the cats are fighting outside. Can you hear Jack growling? I'll go take care of him. He wants to come in with me anyway. Let me wrap this up and I'll go get him. But thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to my channel members for picking these articles. They are so fascinating. And if you would like to pick future History Magazine articles, you can click the join button right down there. I would so love to have you as a channel member. The cats are protesting. Let me wrap this up. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have